country. We used to walk to school with a baked potato in each pocket to keep our hands warm. That's so interesting, but Bubby, where was the old country? You know, the old country. Was it Hungary? Romania? Russia? I don't think so. Anatevka? That sounds familiar. So a while back, I asked you all, what draws us to historical costuming? It's a weird little hobby we've got. Spending so much of our time making clothes that haven't been daily wear for hundreds or thousands of years. And you blew up my inbox in the best way possible. I got so many amazing comments and messages, and I promise you, I read every single one. Everybody has their own story of what brought them to historical costuming, but a few themes kept coming up. Of course, frustration with the sizing and attitudes of modern clothing were up there, as was wanting to dress up for the sheer joy of it. But it went hand in hand with the heavier ideas. The desire to learn from the past, the way clothing makes history tangible, the way you can hold it in your hands. Realizing that history isn't just about kings and queens and wars and rich people. It's the little everyday moments experienced by ordinary workers and farmers and craftsfolk. How it connects us to that history. Most of our ancestors were those ordinary people who don't really make it into the grand historical narratives we like to tell. Costuming connects us with our heritage, and for those of us who are of marginalized heritage, that's an especially powerful thing. A lot of times, engaging with your ancestral past means you have no choice but to engage with the fact that it sucked. And it gets exhausting to look back into history and see nothing enjoyable or even ordinary to grab onto. This time of year always used to make me feel my Jewishness a lot more. For a lot of the American Jews I grew up around, being Jewish wasn't something we thought about as being central to who we were. Other people went to church, we went to synagogue. Other people went to church to sing and have community. We went to synagogue for the same reasons. Other people had a big get-together for Easter. We had one for Passover. But this time of year, Christmas is everywhere. And I'm not knocking it as a holiday. I absolutely see the need for something festive to get you through the coldest, darkest bits of winter. There's a reason so many cultures and religions have big holidays around this time. Maybe it's that Christmas happens in public spaces in a way other holidays rarely do. Companies and schools have Christmas parties, and everywhere advertises for Christmas shopping, and it makes you feel your difference more, and in a very isolating sort of way. The rest of the world is doing something that doesn't include you, and those people can be really resistant to thinking about what that means. It's only really the last couple years since that first video where I spoke up about being Jewish, the video that changed everything for me, that I've had a sense of being Jewish that was positive, not negative. It wasn't this thing that faded into the background most days only to show up when it made me feel out of place. It's who I was. Like someone might be Irish or Colombian or Korean and also American. And having that ability to be who I am in a positive way is down to costuming. It's down to history. It's having a way to connect with your roots and identity that's creative and brings you happiness and isn't just about confronting prejudice. I'm not particularly religious or spiritual. I don't speak or read Hebrew. Cooking is fun, but I don't love it. But I do love history, and I love sewing. I see so many amazing people who are building and expressing that connection with their heritage through costuming. For people who are part of a diaspora, it's so powerful to look back into history and see that line stretching back from you to where you came from. I love Muse and Dionysus' Black Tudor series. It's one thing to read about a historical figure, but it's another to see them embodied and feel brought into their story. Likewise, Catayon Designs on Instagram has done so much cool stuff with Chinese traditional dress, from her Wonder Woman outfit to the Weaver Girl legend to this gorgeous tribute to her grandmother. The problem was, I never knew where my ancestors came from. I grew up without having more than a vague idea of who I was descended from. I knew we were Ashkenazi Jews, but that was all. There were Ashkenazi communities all over Europe, living in cities and in little villages, being part of different cultures or holding themselves apart. and I didn't know where we came from because now we were American. So there wasn't that much to go on if I wanted to learn about my roots. And this is, I guess, a little personal and a little tricky to talk about, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I always feel really envious and bittersweet when I hear people talk about the stories their relatives handed down to them because I don't have a way to access that. I haven't had my grandparents since I was 8 years old or so, and beyond that, connecting with most of my family of origin is just not a possibility for a lot of reasons. Especially on my father's side, there's not really anything good there to work with. So there's first the logistical or academic problem there of trying to research ancestors when you can't talk to the people you're descended through. But also there's really complicated feelings around trying to reach out to your heritage when you have a break in that connection, when your experiences of family and your living ancestors are not good ones. And so it comes back to history and sewing. When I study old magazines or photos or dresses, it's like I'm trying to ask those people about their lives even though they're not here to answer me. If I can't ask my parents or my grandparents, maybe that's not so different. I wanted to understand how my family ended up in America and what it was like for the first people who made the crossing. I want to know what they left behind, and I want to know more of what they did here than a better life in America, like you read about in history textbooks. There's this really frustrating slant to how America teaches the history of Jewish immigration. It's very self-congratulatory and leaves out just about anything that would contradict that attitude. Life may have been better, but that doesn't mean everything was perfect or that there was no poverty and no anti-Semitism. My ancestors might have been refugees from genocide, but the reason they could come to America is because of another genocide against the indigenous peoples of this continent. I'm recording this from land that would have been in the care of the Ohlone. My ancestors got off the boat and stepped onto land stolen from the care of the Lenape. Talking about that gets in the way of America patting itself on the back for welcoming refugees. I'm really lucky that my maternal uncle inherited a lot of his side of the family's records. He was really close with his parents, so whatever we had to pass down ended up with him. He was so excited to do this sort of research because I think a lot of records were lost or destroyed during the Holocaust. The idea that we won't be able to find anything from the old country cuts us off from that part of our history. In a way, that's a win for the fascists because it separates us from our heritage. As soon as he realized that working with me, he might be able to find something more, he got so enthusiastic. It's really heartwarming to see. And it was an amazing experience to be sitting in his living room with the corgi getting fur all over us. And I'm holding in my hands this original photograph of my great-grandmother that was taken in the old country over 100 years ago. I'm looking at her as a young teenager and telling my uncle everything I can guess about her from the dress she's wearing, and he's telling me that all of it tracks with the stories he heard about her from my grandparents. On my father's side, there's none of that. I don't have any photos or stories or anything. I'm working from scraps. So where I can't be a relative, I have to become a historian. It's research. It's a lot more academic. The wonders of modern technology and the internet and digitized archives mean that even though all I have to go on is my grandparents' names, not even their birth dates or birthplaces, I can still reach out into the past and find something. I sat down one afternoon when I was having a bad fatigue day and just started putting their names into one of these genealogy sites, and something like 6 hours went by without me even looking up. With those little scraps, with being a researcher where I can't be a granddaughter, I followed that side of the family a generation further back in America than my mother's side. It feels so powerful to be able to step over that broken connection and all the immediate family issues. I know my great-great-grandparents' names. I never thought I would be able to know that with the issues my family has. My great-great-grandmother, Carolina, was 18 when she got on a boat going from Hamburg to the UK and then on to New York City in November of 1880. She'd already traveled there from somewhere in Austria-Hungary. I moved across the US by myself when I wasn't much older than her. All I had to do was pack a few suitcases and get on a plane, but she had to go so much further. She didn't speak the language. She had to board at least 2 ships, and the only person with her was a younger brother. We don't even know if he made it to America with her. She was my age now when she married her first husband, and her whole life she lived in the Lower East Side. She was there for the 1902 kosher meat boycott. She was there for the Triangle Shirtwaist Strike in 1909, and then the fire a few years later. We read about these things, but she lived them. When I think back to what moving at 19 was like for me, it was transformative. I was leaving everything I knew behind, and I had to become a new person in a lot of ways. So did great-great-grandma Carolina. Part of coming to that Lower East Side neighborhood was becoming American, even in a very Jewish community. So she would have gotten new clothes as soon as she could. So we're looking at 1881 or 82, what historical costumers today call the natural form era, between the big sloped bustles and the big shelf bustles. I've never done anything from this period before, so I went into Lacis to see if they had any reference books or maybe pattern drafting guides from that era. The people there were unbelievably helpful. They always are. So I found this, which has some really great photos of just regular people during that era. Looking at high fashion clothes is only somewhat useful because Carolina was a dirt poor immigrant girl. You talk about immigrants coming here with the clothes on their backs, that was probably her. So she's not dressing like a fashion plate. And then the folks working there also found me this. It's 2 combined editions of a pattern drafting system, kind of like Keystone from 1880 and 1883. So depending on how Carolina got her new outfits, they might have been made using these same methods. And then this book was just sitting there on the shelf and I had to get it. New York City's Jewish community was a huge part of the garment trade during Carolina's lifetime. She was there for 9 years before she got married. Chances are she worked in the industry, and her second husband, my great-great-grandfather, was a tailor. The clothes we study and admire and dress up in for fun, these weren't just clothes, these were their lives, and so were the clothes they wore. I can't ask great-great-grandma Carolina what it was like to live in that neighborhood, or what she did for work, or what it was like to be a Jewish girl in a new world. Just like I couldn't ask my parents where the old country was for our family. But maybe Carolina's clothes can tell me. I want to recreate something like the first outfit she would have gotten in New York City. I don't know yet if it'll be an everyday dress or her new best dress. I don't know if she would have bought it or made it herself at home. I don't know how much the fabric would cost, how many hours she would have worked to afford it, how many hours she would have spent sewing it. But I can study, and I can sew, and I can find out. I'll never learn to roast a chicken the way my grandmother did, or inherit a menorah from my family, or hear their stories of the old country they left behind. But this weird little hobby means I can still get to know them. It doesn't matter what went on with my immediate family. It doesn't matter what the history textbooks say or don't want to say about my ancestors. This way, I can literally walk in their shoes. I can celebrate where I came from and what makes me different instead of looking into the past, whether that's their past or my past, and only seeing pain. In a way, Hanukkah has always been about that feeling. This is a holiday where we commemorate that resilience and resistance and the struggle to not be assimilated beyond any recognition of who you are, of what your heritage is. Even, especially, in a world that wants to smother rather than celebrate your identity. We light up what makes us different. We celebrate having survived. Great-great-grandma Carolina didn't cross an ocean at 18 for me to be afraid to be Jewish. And costuming lets me honor her memory in a way that also honors who I am. It's on my terms. It doesn't matter that I'm not very religious or that I'm estranged from my family. Costuming lets us study and feel and express and see ourselves in history in a way so many of us have never been able to. And I think that is why we love it. With the Jewish Writers Initiative Digital Storytellers Lab, I'm making a series of videos on this journey of reproducing Carolina's clothes. And I'll be going to New York to wear them in the same street she did 140 years ago. Look out for more info and updates sometime in the new year, and if you want more, there will be a lot of bonus content and behind the scenes goodness on my Patreon. Things might get a little quieter on the channel while I focus on giving this project the time it deserves, so your support will make all the difference while I'm working on it. I want to hear about your ancestors too. If you know what your great-great-grandparents might have worn, tell us all about it in the comments. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe because I have a particularly long-awaited corsetry hot take coming in the new year. Whatever holidays you are celebrating, I hope you have light and warmth and happiness and people you love to spend them with. And I will see you again next year. Bye! Bubby, are you really saying our family was from Anatevka? Yes! And I remember this weird little milkman who was always singing.